Well, to give you the account, we have to go back to the Carboniferous period, during which the forests grew. Now, Bideford was south of the equator, hot, wet area of delta, with rivers running from the north and a lake to the south. And this, on the top surface of this delta grew forests, the trees of which died and were swept down the rivers and accumulated either in oxbow lakes, in abandoned meanders of the rivers, or as dams, as log jams within the river system itself. These log jams, these concentrations of woody trunks, were buried, and then subsequently buried initially by sediments laid down on top of them, and then progressively to great depths, and by great depths I mean something like 5 miles or 8 kilometers of burial, by an entire mountain chain moving over this area and burying it very rapidly after the sediments were deposited. These were not modern plants, but were the fern trees. Very large fern forests were developed in the Carboniferous before modern trees were even evolved. These were 20-30 meters high and grew very rapidly to give you a dense forest, but of fern. There were vertebrates within the forests, were the largest animals. These were similar to modern, say, crocodiles in a swamp environment. There were many other smaller animals, ammonite-type animals and shells in the water. Some of the more ancient insects, like dragonflies, filled the air. The Bideford Black was buried by layers and layers of rock, and then by the mountains thrusted over this area of North Devon. The mountains created topography, created hills and high ridges, which then eroded away. So it was basically the weathering, the rain and the wind blowing and eroding the grains of the sediment away. That sediment was carried down by the rivers into the ocean. So the sediments that were covered Bideford were then deposited in the surrounding areas out in the Bristol Channel and down in the Plymouth Basin. Our area of the continental plate, continental plates not being static, was moving progressively northwards all the time, and the plate contained the mountains and the rivers and the deltas. So as far as anybody living at the time would have known, they would not have seen their world moving, but because it moved as an entirety to the north, progressively to the north, to end up at the present situation 51 degrees 15 minutes north, which is where we are today in 2013. This process has taken about 300 million years. The Bideford Black, it's a form of carbon that was created from fossil fern trees by the pressure and the temperature of the burial process. So it's essentially carbon mixed with the mineral matter, which can be clay, and during the Carboniferous, this was the first time that trees developed on this planet, and this was because they had lignin evolved as the structural material which gave rise to the trunks of the trees. And that lignin, when compressed and heated, gives us our Bideford Black. The reason why there's so much trunk material from the trees and not much leaf and spore material is because in the log jams and the abandoned channels, most of the finer material, the leaves and the spores, that's going to be swept away and be found further out in the basin, which would lie to the south of Bideford. Bideford Black is really quite similar to a number of carbonaceous deposits around the world. Its location near to a centre of population and currently being eroded by the land surface makes it more accessible, and in that sense it's not unique, but it's an unusual situation to find carbonaceous material. The reason why Bideford Black is different than many of the carbon deposits is that it is not a coal. It's not a seam of coal. Coal seams were deposited on the delta top as continuous layers, which would, for example, run from South Wales to Oxford over to Belgium and to Germany. These massive layers of coaly material represent one major event of forest development. Bideford Black is not. It's the fern plants accumulating within the river channels and abandoned river channels. It can be found from the coast at Greencliff as a thin band, but so it was developed during a restricted period of time, running through Bideford to Easter Water and then to the east towards South Molton. It then dies out, or we don't have outcrops which allow us to identify it. It's difficult to know when you look at North Devon farmland, cows, grass, what lies underneath it. So it's one of the problems is actually mapping the extent of this sort of deposit, since we only see it where it's cut down the River Tor, the River Torridge, these banks of the rivers where it was first identified.
I love the story about the overhead railway which brought material down from Easter Water on the hillside, and it crossed Barnstaple Street as an overhead railway. And as it went across, it must have been fairly rickety because it used to shake and this dust used to fall down and coat people underneath. And it was a real welcome to Bideford, get coated with black powder. And eventually the townspeople had enough and they took the owner to court and he had to close it. And that was when the industry really closed in the 19th century. But there is a photograph of it, but it's a wonderful picture of people coming into Bideford and this sort of fine powder storm coming down.
I can remember we used to keep the map for the underground in a glass case, and it was on a scroll, and we used to get it out from time to time and each take an end and unroll it, anchor it down, and then Mr. Cooks would draw in how far the miners had gone underground. No, I can't remember how far it was. It was quite a way, but there's also quite a few branches coming off as well, down sort of thing.
Did it go towards Easter Water or way?
It's all over the place under Easter Water, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
They filled the trolleys with by hand, and what do you say? You said
That's just pick and shovel it was.
pick and shovel into the thing, and then tap the wires for the winchmen to.
Yeah, to pull the tram up.
On top of High Street, we call it Moses Hole. Now I built a house in there, and all the foundation is on the pigment black, and it's just like digging black chalk. Foundations, they were spotless, and we had the surveyors and architects, what do you call them, all from Bideford and from Exeter. They stopped us from building because they never had a house in Bideford. They've never built actually on a seam.
Right, yeah.
So we had to put special foundations in.
Right.
It's only a little 3-bedroom house. Chapel House was built for the owner. Now a friend of mine, the story goes, his wife used to babysit. And at nights and during the day sometimes you used to hear this moaning and groaning. All it was, the wind went across the entrances mines and through the shafts. Because the one goes under, there's one of the tunnels or mines go under Chapel House.
Right, yeah.
And it vibrates up front. And they always, for years, before it was all haunted, and it stayed empty for years, didn't it?
It goes back to the 17th century, and the records obviously get more fragmentary the further back you go. But it certainly is around the 17th century. The 18th century, we think it was still going. 19th century, definitely going, because we've got lots of news accounts on it. And of course, it then was reopened in the 20th century before closing, apparently, finally, but who knows. Yeah. It was used for lots of different things, actually. Its main use to start with was as a fuel for our lime kilns. They imported the limestone from South Wales. It was then burnt in the lime kilns using this coal, and the material that was left was then spread on the fields. So it was one of the mainstays of agriculture, because they used to say it sweetened the land, it made it more fertile. Yeah. And that was one of its main uses. It certainly seems to have been used to some extent in the pottery industry, although its main fuel there was furs, but I think they used this stuff as well. They also used it as a pigment. There's this famous story about the Royal Navy painting the bottoms of their boats because apparently it repelled worms. So when they went to tropical climes, it helped their boats. And then they ground it up as a pigment to make paint. So it's had quite a variety of uses. Used as a decorating paint. It was made in Bideford, and it was sold in Bideford under the trade name Bideford Black. And certainly I've seen old tins of paint, and it was a black gloss paint that was used quite extensively. But as with all these things, once you've finished a pot of paint, you don't keep the pot. And the pots themselves become really quite rare.
I'm Gerald, ex-miner from Bideford Black Pigments. Working on the surface once, then after I was a miner down under and the foreman. I lived the other side of town, which was a long walk. We walked and we met groups, and we walked to work, got there like, say, about quarter day, because we had to change, into the work gear. We used to go in what they call the airing cupboard, which had the big boilers, to change into your clothes. They've been there all night, still filthy from the day before, and some of them were covered in fleas, but because they were so dirty, but they was warm. Change into your clothes, 10 minutes or so, then walk to work down where we used to walk in the mill. We'd have to walk down the big slope down on the side. Well, all depends where you was working. Yeah. And then you walk in and you clock in, before you do this. Then when you go down, you wait till the foreman started the mill up. And as soon as he started the mill up, I was on the nozzle that day. I'd have to sit there all day, not all day, but have your breaks. Yeah. But all the time, taking the bags off. And after that, dinner time, you'd go into the packing shed for an half an hour dinner. You have your sandwiches. They'd make the tea, I must admit that. But you'd sit there, then you'd be talking about what the rest had done, or general thing. And in the afternoon, back onto the mill until 4:30. I always remember, because everybody else used to stop work at 5 o'clock, sorry. Because that day, but we stopped at 4:30 because we only had half an hour lunch break. Yeah. After that, back up the hill, up the steps to the shower at 4:30. Not nearly 4:30 or after 4:30. That was it. You were like in the old day. Then back up the top to the shower room. Then you each had your own little shower, and they're just filthy. If you touch the sides, then you'd have a shower, try to get as clean as you could. A big red, about you know, the biggest blocks of soap you could have, carbolic soap. And you do your hair and everything in it, and put on your day clothes. They would be just as dirty. Then you'd go home, and when you got home, the first thing, when I was single, my mother would say to me, "Right, I think you better get in the bath." So that's what we done, and after that was my wife who got in the bath. Who was in charge? When I was in charge, I tell them where they had to work, because there were different faces, what they call the faces where you get the comb out of. And I would tell them, or when I was young, the foreman would tell me where I'd be working, and, you know, working me, and say Donald Glover would be on one face, and Bill and Ronnie Short would be on another face.
Yeah. How many of you down there together?
I think the most was 8, and the least was about 4. We had what they call carbide lamps, and it's like a rock. You put it in a container, just a little bit bigger than this cup.
Yeah.
Put the rocks in, put the top on, which the top is a dome shape, contained water, and there would be a spout there, which you let the water in, more water going, it turned this carbide to gas. Then the light would come there. It'd be just a flame, you know, not a torch or nothing like that. Then if it was going a bit too fast, you turn the water down a little bit. It was all governed by the water.
How long did they last?
They'd last all day.
It would?
Yeah, or the 8-hour shift. In the morning, that's what I forgot. In the morning, you'd have to, what they call, prime your lamp before you went down. Jerk the old carbide, which was dust, out, put the new carbide in, top up with water.
And what did you wear on your feet?
Welly boots.
Right.
It's always welly boots.
Right.
It was never cold down under, because, you know, it's the same temperature. About 50 degrees, that's centigrade.
Yeah.
No, Fahrenheit. Fahrenheit, about 50. Yeah. And some little seams that were, you know, not in the air, like, they'd be a bit hotter. Where you got the one that, because the air was being pumped down through a pipe later on, it would circulate, but sometimes not circulate the seams.
Yeah.
Mr. Ron Pither, well, average day you be there by 8, you know, and what you do, report in. We didn't have such a thing as clocking in cards or nothing like that, you know. Turn up, and then Mr. Wally Muckford, you know, he was our foreman. He used to allocate us our jobs, and it could be in the mill, like I said, or underground, you know. But once you got in there, well, you was nearly all ready in any case. All you had to do is put on your dirty clothes, you know. Well, if you was allocated for down underground, you make sure you had your helmet and your carbine lamp, you know. So, if it was down in the mill, then you'd just go down, report to George Arthurs. He wasn't actually a charge hand, but he used to run the motors and that, you know, for the pumps, for the guns down underneath as well, you know, and it used to work the lights, everything, you know, this machine. Used to report down to George Arthur, and he would say, Ron, you might have on the nozzle which fills the bags up, you know, or sat down doing an easy little job like sample packets.
In an average week,
Yeah.
how many days would you be mining on the face?
I would say 4, but when you say 4, it could be spread over the days, you know, because you might be underground working for the morning into the afternoon, and if they wanted something rushed out, you used to get a message down to that it was needed upon the top, and you'd be doing anything, you know. And so I'd say, yeah, 3 or 4 days out of the 5, you know. Tell you the truth, I used to like working underground, tell you the truth.
How did you see where you were going?
Well, carbine lamps. It's carbine. You take the top off, carbine put in the bottom, then the top out was filled with water, and then you had a adjustment drip that you turn on to make the gas, and then you'd light it, and then the shield used to be out at the back,
Yeah.
so that when you was going down with it in your hand, it would shine forward.
What did the Bideford Black go to? Where did it go to? Can you remember?
Well, all over the place, because some of it, I tell you, it used to be transported from Barnstable. The lorries used to come from Barnstable station, and that used to go, I don't know where it went, but that was all the red sample packets you could get, and a lot used to go to Max Factor for you ladies with mascara. And well, they used it for anything and everything. Back then, I was told that a lot of it had to go into paint to give it a good base, And then different builders, well, these tiling people, they used to put a mixed black, so you get those black rough tiles that you can get.
Yeah.
And that used to go in there at that as well, So used to go all over the place, darling.
Mm.
Yeah.
Can you take me from there on a typical day for you?
Well, we get up there. As regards to clothes, it was all chucked in a pile. In the first come, first served, you used to take off all our clean clothes, go through the clothes and find what It was so black, everything was so black, you couldn't pick out what you had the day before, sort of thing. You'd find a pair of trousers, and by the end of the day, you were black from head to foot. Every part of your body was black. And I've said to Tom, when we used to come up and have a shower, there'd be 5 in a row, and you couldn't wash your own back, so you all turned one way, and you had to wash the books back in front of you. It was that black. But
do you remember the soap that you used?
pardon?
Do you remember the soap?
Yeah, Lifebuoy. I was lucky because my father was in charge of all the soap and everything. And I used to get the best, and we used to wash it, there was no shampoo. It was just Lifebuoy for everything. My dad was in charge of the soap at this trade out now, so I didn't go short of soap. Well, what used to happen, when they started bringing the trams up, they tip it into the mill.
Right.
So then there'd be a man in there loading the conveyor belts, and then it would go down then into this big drum which used to heat it up, and then there'd be a man there, and then it used to go through this big thing that used to turn to dry out all the paint, and then at the other end we would bag it up like in cement bags. It would look something like cement, really. But then there was a packing shed where they used to have small boxes, all different sizes. No, nobody liked it. It was just a job that paid good money. And most of my friends and most of the people from Easter Water worked up there. There was more that worked up there from Easter Water than didn't work up there.
You didn't stay working there for very long?
No.
You did your stint, you did your time.
You were lucky back then because you could pick and choose your jobs.
Yeah.
You could fall out of one job right into another. But what attracted them up there was the money.
Right.
Compared to other jobs, it was good. Where Owen was learning a trade, getting nothing. Up there, you were getting double what they were getting earning a trade. Some of the mines used to go all over the place. And what Owen was on about, one of them came out down where my uncle lived, and one of the apple trees disappeared in the garden into one of these, into this paint scene, and all these chickens were running around black. But they'd be down there scratching the road. My mum came up there one day when I was working on top. My mum came up, said, "Excuse me, could you tell me where Jimmy's working?" He was that black. I said, "Mother, you should be able to tell with my blue eyes."
I couldn't say, because I only ever went to the workshop once all the time I was there because it was so dirty. My husband then that worked there, I can remember, I mean, they used to shower when they left work, and he'd come home and he'd need another bath when he got home, and when he sweat, I suppose with all the miners, I mean, the black pigment would still come out their skin, it would come out all onto the bed linen and everything, and you'd have to, you know, give it a really good scrub to get it clean. They always left their dirty old clothes at work, changed in and out of them, but the pigment seemed to get right in underneath the skin. If they had an injury in the mine and the black pigment got in there, it was almost left them like a mark, like a tattoo, because they could never get it clean properly, you know.
Groups, and we walked to work, got there like, say, about 1:15 because we had to change, you know, into the work gear. We used to go in what they call the airing cupboard, which had the big boilers, to change into your clothes. They've been there all night, still filthy from the day before, and some of them were covered in fleas, but you know, because they were so dirty, but they was warm. Change into your clothes, 10 minutes or so, then walk to work, then back up the top to the shower room. Then you each had your own little shower, and you know, they're just filthy. You know, if you touch the sides, then you'd have a shower, try to get as clean as you could. A big red, about, you know, the biggest blocks of soap you could have, carbolic soap, and you'd do your hair and everything, and then put on your day clothes. They would be just as dirty. Then you'd go home. And when you got home, the first thing, when I was single, my mother would say to me, "Right, I think you better get in the bath." So that's what we done, and after that was my wife who got in the bath.
I think what always struck me as a material from an artist's perspective was just how black it is, and the fact that you can dig something straight out of the ground and use it so directly and so simply was always a surprise to me, and I think it surprises the people that I work with when I run workshops and show other people this pigment. It makes you realise why it was used as a pigment, because it is such a strong colour, and it's such a wonderful consistency. I say the geology of it explains why it's such a lovely consistency, the way it breaks down, the way it dissolves in water and other mediums. I think one of my loveliest memories, or my loveliest thoughts, is of swapping some Bideford Black with an Aboriginal elder that I worked with at the Appledore Arts Festival a few years ago, and how he recognised how the people that, you know, from his culture and the connection to the earth that the Aboriginal people have, and that he recognised that the people in Bideford are not very different, and that we still have a very deep connection to our earth, and something like Bideford Black can actually highlight our connection to our environment and how much we depend on it, and how much our personalities and character and culture has been based on the place that we live. So for me, that's a sort of very exciting thing, that he took some Bideford Black with him, he uses it in his rituals, and I use some Australian earth pigments in my paintings as well. So for me, that is one of my sort of the most exciting and most special memories that I have connected with the projects and of using Bideford Black.